What would make a veteran police officer with 15 years of experience walk away from the force and never look back? In today's story, you'll meet Detective Sarah Chen and discover what she encountered during one seemingly routine investigation that shattered everything she thought she knew about justice, truth, and the very nature of reality itself. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button to help us reach our next milestone. Drop a like and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, settle in, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about the world we live in. There are moments in a person's life when the ground beneath their feet simply disappears. When everything they've built their career on, everything they've trusted and believed in, crumbles in an instant. I carried one such moment with me for 3 years before I finally found the courage to share this story. My name is Sarah Chen, and until recently, I was a detective with the Metropolitan Police Department. For 15 years, I had dedicated my life to serving and protecting the community, working my way up from patrol officer to detective in the Major Crimes Unit. I had investigated murders, solved complex fraud cases, and brought countless criminals to justice. I prided myself on my analytical mind, my attention to detail, and my unwavering commitment to finding the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. I thought I had seen everything the job could throw at me: drug dealers, gang violence, domestic disputes that turned deadly, white-collar criminals who destroyed lives with a keystroke. I had witnessed the worst of humanity and somehow managed to maintain my faith in the system, in the belief that good could triumph over evil if you just worked hard enough and never gave up. I was wrong about everything. The case that ended my career began on a Tuesday morning in October, seemingly no different from any other day. I arrived at the precinct at 7:30, grabbed my usual coffee from the break room, and settled in at my desk to review the overnight reports. The morning briefing was routine, discussing ongoing investigations and new cases that had come in during the night shift. That's when Lieutenant Rodriguez called me into his office with a case file that would change my life forever. "Chen, I've got something for you," he said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. "Missing person case. Probably nothing complicated, but the family's been calling non-stop and we need someone to look into it properly." I opened the file and found myself looking at a photograph of a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. Her name was Jessica Martinez, 24 years old, a graduate student at the local university studying environmental science. According to the initial report, she had disappeared 3 days earlier while conducting field research in the Millfield Nature Preserve, a sprawling area of protected woodland about 30 miles outside the city. The circumstances seemed straightforward enough. Jessica had told her roommate she was going to collect soil samples for her thesis project and would be back by evening. When she failed to return that night and didn't answer her phone, her roommate contacted campus security, who eventually called the police. A preliminary search of the preserve had turned up her car in the parking area, but no sign of Jessica herself. "What makes this different from a standard missing hiker case?" I asked Lieutenant Rodriguez. He leaned back in his chair, and I noticed something in his expression that I couldn't quite identify. "The park rangers found something unusual at her research site. They're saying it doesn't make sense, and honestly, I'm not sure what to make of their report either." I flipped through the file until I found the ranger's incident report. What I read there made me pause. According to Ranger Williams, Jessica's research equipment had been found arranged in a perfect circle around a small clearing, approximately 20 feet in diameter. Her notebook was open to a blank page, with her pen lying precisely in the center of the circle. Most strangely, there were no footprints leading away from the site, despite the soft earth that should have captured any tracks. "Could be an animal attack," I suggested, though even as I said it, the explanation felt inadequate. Maybe she was dragged away and someone moved her equipment afterward. "That's what we thought initially," Rodriguez replied. "But there's more. The soil samples she collected are still there, but according to the lab, they're not from that location. The mineral composition doesn't match anything in the preserve." I studied the file more carefully, looking for details that might explain the discrepancies. Jessica Martinez had been an exemplary student with no history of mental health issues, no romantic problems that might suggest she'd run away, and no financial troubles that might indicate foul play. Her family described her as responsible and methodical, someone who always followed safety protocols when conducting field work. "I'll take it," I said, closing the file. "When can I get out to the preserve to examine the site?" "This afternoon. I've arranged for Ranger Williams to meet you there at 2 o'clock. He's been working that area for 12 years, knows every trail and landmark. If anyone can help you understand what happened out there, it's him." I spent the rest of the morning reviewing Jessica's background, interviewing her roommate, professors, and family members. Everyone painted the same picture of a dedicated young woman, passionate about her studies and committed to environmental conservation. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Robert Hammond, explained that Jessica had been working on a project examining soil contamination patterns around abandoned industrial sites. She was particularly interested in this one section of the preserve, Dr. Hammond told me during our phone interview. There used to be a chemical plant there in the 1950s, closed down after some kind of accident. Jessica thought she might find unusual mineral deposits that could tell us about long-term environmental impacts. This information added another layer to the mystery. Why would Jessica be collecting soil samples that didn't match the location where she was working? Had she been moving between different sites? And if so, where were the samples from the actual research location? At 2 o'clock sharp, I arrived at the Millfield Nature Preserve and met Ranger Williams at the main parking area. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with the kind of steady demeanor that comes from spending decades in the wilderness. "Detective Chen, thanks for coming out. I've got to tell you, in all my years working these woods, I've never seen anything quite like what we found at that research site." As we walked along the trail toward Jessica's last known location, Ranger Williams filled me in on the preserve's history and layout. The area covered nearly 5,000 acres of mixed forest and wetland, with over 30 miles of hiking trails. The section where Jessica had been working was relatively remote, accessed by a narrow trail that branched off from the main path about 2 miles into the woods. "Most visitors stick to the main trails," Williams explained as we hiked. "This particular area doesn't see much traffic, which is probably why Jessica chose it for her research. She could work undisturbed for hours without encountering other hikers. The deeper we went into the preserve, the more I began to understand why Jessica had been drawn to this location. The forest was dense and peaceful, with towering oak and maple trees that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scents of fallen leaves and rich soil. After about 45 minutes of hiking, Ranger Williams stopped and pointed ahead. "The research site is just through those trees. I have to warn you, Detective, even though it's been 3 days, the scene still gives me an uneasy feeling." As we approached the clearing where Jessica had been working, I immediately understood what he meant. The site had an atmosphere that was difficult to describe, a sense of wrongness that seemed to permeate the very air around us. The equipment arrangement that had been described in the report was even more unsettling in person. Jessica's field equipment formed a perfect circle that seemed almost ritualistic in its precision. Her soil collection kit, pH meter, sample containers, and measuring tools were positioned at exact intervals around the perimeter, as if someone had used a compass and protractor to place each item. The positioning was far too precise to be accidental, Yet there was no logical reason why Jessica would have arranged her equipment this way. In the center of the circle lay her research notebook, open to a page that should have contained her findings but was completely blank, except for a single pen lying horizontally across the middle of the page. The pen was positioned with the same mathematical precision as everything else, perfectly aligned with magnetic north according to my compass. "Has anyone touched anything since you found it?" I asked Ranger Williams. "No, ma'am. We photographed everything and then left it exactly as we discovered it. The only thing we moved was her backpack, and that was just to check for identification." I walked slowly around the perimeter of the circle, careful not to disturb the arrangement while examining each piece of equipment. Everything appeared to be in perfect working order, with no signs of damage or struggle. Jessica's water bottle was still half full, her sandwiches untouched in their plastic container. If she had been attacked or had fled in panic, surely she would have grabbed some of these essential items. The absence of footprints was even more disturbing than the equipment arrangement. The recent October rains had left the forest floor soft and impressionable, perfect for capturing tracks. Yet beyond the immediate area where Jessica had apparently been working, there were no human footprints leading away from the site in any direction. "Ranger Williams, have you seen any unusual animal activity in this area recently? Large predators that might explain the lack of tracks?" He shook his head slowly. "That's what I thought initially, but we don't have any predators in this preserve large enough to carry off a person without leaving drag marks or blood evidence. Besides, if an animal had attacked her, why would her equipment be arranged like this?" I knelt down to examine the soil around Jessica's notebook more closely. The earth here was different from the surrounding area, darker and somehow denser. When I pressed my finger into the ground, it felt unusually cold, as if the warmth of the afternoon sun hadn't penetrated this particular spot. The lab report mentioned that her soil samples don't match this location. "Do you know where else in the preserve she might have been collecting samples?" "That's the thing, Detective. According to her research permit, this was the only site she was authorized to study, and based on her equipment and the amount of work she'd clearly done here, she'd been at this spot for several hours before she disappeared." I stood up and surveyed the clearing again, trying to piece together a timeline of events that made sense. Jessica had arrived at the preserve early in the morning, hiked to this remote location, and begun her research work. She had collected soil samples, though apparently not from this immediate area. At some point, she had arranged her equipment in this precise circular pattern, opened her notebook to a blank page, and then simply vanished without a trace. The more I studied the scene, the more convinced I became that Jessica's disappearance was not a random crime or accident. The deliberate arrangement of her belongings suggested planning, purpose, and knowledge of exactly what was happening. But whether that planning had come from Jessica herself or from someone else remained the central question. "Ranger Williams, you mentioned that there used to be a chemical plant somewhere in this area. How close are we to that location?" His expression changed, becoming more guarded. "Well, and that's interesting that you ask. The old Hartwell chemical facility was located about half a mile north of here, deeper in the woods where most hikers never go." "Can you show me?" He hesitated before answering. "I suppose I could, but I should tell you that we generally discourage people from going to that area. The ground is still contaminated in some spots, and there are some structural hazards from the old buildings that were never properly demolished." We left Jessica's research site undisturbed and followed Ranger Williams deeper into the preserve, along what was barely a trail, more like a deer path winding through increasingly dense vegetation. The forest seemed to grow quieter as we walked, with fewer bird calls and less rustling in the underbrush. After 20 minutes of hiking through terrain that grew progressively more difficult, we emerged into a large clearing where the remnants of the Hartwell chemical facility were still visible. Concrete foundations poked through the forest floor like broken teeth, overgrown with vines and moss. Rusted metal debris was scattered throughout the area, and several partially collapsed buildings stood as silent monuments to whatever had happened here decades earlier. What kind of accident caused the plant to close? I asked as we picked our way carefully through the debris field. That's where the story gets a bit murky, Williams replied. According to the official records, there was an industrial accident in 1953 that resulted in chemical contamination of the surrounding soil and groundwater. Several workers were hospitalized, and the company decided to shut down operations rather than deal with the cleanup costs. I noticed that the soil here had the same dark, dense quality I had observed at Jessica's research site. When I knelt down to examine it more closely, I felt that same unusual coldness, as if the earth itself was somehow different from the surrounding forest floor. But there are other stories, Williams continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Local folks who lived here back then claimed there was more to it than just an accident. They said strange things started happening in the weeks before the plant closed. Workers reported seeing lights in the forest at night, hearing sounds that didn't belong. Some people claimed the accident wasn't an accident at all, but the result of experiments that went wrong. I stood up and looked around the abandoned facility with new eyes. What kind of experiments? Nobody knows for sure. The company records were sealed, and most of the workers who might have talked about what really happened either moved away or died years ago. But the stories persisted. People claimed that Hartwell Chemical wasn't just manufacturing industrial solvents like they claimed. They said the company was working on some kind of research project for the government, something classified that required complete secrecy. As Williams spoke, I began to understand why Jessica might have been drawn to this location for her research. If there had been unusual chemical experiments conducted here, the soil contamination patterns might tell a story that had been buried for 70 years. But it also raised new questions about her disappearance. Has anyone else ever gone missing in this area of the preserve? Williams was quiet for a long moment before answering. Not recently, but back in the 1950s and 60s there were several cases of hikers who disappeared in this general area. Most were eventually explained as people getting lost or having accidents, but a few were never solved. I photographed the abandoned facility and collected soil samples from several locations, making careful notes about their positions relative to the old buildings. The samples would need to be analyzed and compared to the ones found at Jessica's research site, but I was beginning to suspect they would match. As we prepared to leave the abandoned chemical plant and return to Jessica's research site, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. Carved into the concrete foundation of what had been the main building was a symbol I had never seen before, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change as I stared at it. Ranger Williams. Have you ever noticed this marking before? He followed my gaze to the carved symbol and his face went pale. Detective, that marking wasn't there yesterday. I walk through this area every few weeks as part of my regular patrols, and I know every inch of these ruins. Someone carved that symbol very recently. The implications hit me immediately. Someone had been at this location within the past few days, around the same time that Jessica Martinez had disappeared. The symbol was fresh, cut deep into the concrete with what must have been professional tools. This was no casual vandalism by teenage hikers. I photographed the symbol from multiple angles and measured its dimensions carefully. The pattern was approximately 3 feet in diameter, consisting of interlocking geometric shapes that seemed to follow some kind of mathematical progression. Despite its apparent complexity, there was something oddly familiar about it, as if I had seen similar markings somewhere before. We need to get back to Jessica's research site, I told Williams. I want to take another look at how her equipment was arranged. The hike back to Jessica's research site felt different now. charged with a new sense of urgency and unease. As we walked through the dense forest, I couldn't shake the image of that freshly carved symbol from my mind. The geometric pattern seemed to burn behind my eyelids, its complex interlocking shapes suggesting meanings I couldn't quite grasp. When we arrived back at the clearing where Jessica had been conducting her research, I immediately noticed something that had escaped my attention during our first visit. I pulled out my camera and compared the photos I had taken of the symbol at the abandoned chemical plant with the arrangement of Jessica's equipment. The correlation was undeniable. Her research tools weren't randomly positioned in a circle, they were arranged to mirror the exact geometric pattern carved into the concrete foundation. Each piece of equipment corresponded to a specific element of the symbol, placed with mathematical precision that would have required detailed knowledge of the marking's design. "This changes everything," I said to Ranger Williams, showing him the comparison on my camera display. Jessica didn't just stumble upon something out here, she knew exactly what she was looking for. Williams studied the images with growing concern. But how could she have known about that symbol if it was only carved recently? And why would she arrange her equipment to match it? I walked around the perimeter of Jessica's equipment circle again, this time viewing it not as the remnants of interrupted research, but as a deliberate recreation of something much more significant. Her pH meter corresponded to one point of the geometric pattern, her sample containers to another, each tool positioned to complete a larger design that was invisible until you understood what you were looking at. In the center of the arrangement, Jessica's notebook lay open to that blank page with the pen positioned horizontally across it. Now I realized that the pen wasn't just randomly placed. It was oriented to align with specific points in the equipment circle, creating what appeared to be a compass or directional indicator pointing toward the abandoned chemical facility. "Ranger Williams, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Has anyone else been asking questions about the old Hartwell chemical plant recently? Any researchers, government officials, or people claiming to be investigating the historical contamination?" His expression grew troubled. "Actually, yes. About 2 weeks ago, a man came to the ranger station asking for detailed maps of this area. He said he was working on some kind of environmental survey for the state, but something about him didn't seem right. He was too interested in the specific location of the old plant, and he had questions about access routes that most legitimate researchers wouldn't care about. This was the first concrete lead I had found, and it suggested that Jessica's research had intersected with someone else's agenda in ways that might have put her in danger. I made detailed notes about the mysterious visitor and asked Williams to describe him as thoroughly as possible. Mid-40s, average height and build, dark hair. He wore expensive clothes, not the kind of gear you'd expect from someone planning to hike in the woods. But what really stuck with me was his eyes. They were intense, like he was studying everything around him, memorizing details. And he had this way of asking questions that made it seem like he already knew the answers. I photographed Jessica's equipment arrangement from multiple angles, documenting the precise positioning of each item and its relationship to the overall pattern. The more I studied the scene, the more convinced I became that Jessica hadn't simply disappeared. She had been drawn into something much larger and more complex than a routine graduate research project. As we prepared to leave the preserve, I noticed something else that had been nagging at the edge of my consciousness throughout the afternoon. The forest around Jessica's research site was completely silent. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no insects buzzing through the air. It was as if the normal ecosystem had been disrupted by some unseen force. "How long has it been this quiet out here?" I asked Williams. He paused and looked around, apparently noticing the silence for the first time. "You know, I hadn't really thought about it, but now that you mention it, this area has seemed different lately. Usually, you can't walk 50 feet through these woods without hearing dozens of different bird species, but it's been like this for maybe the past week. The timeline was too convenient to be coincidental. Whatever had happened to Jessica Martinez had also affected the natural environment around her research site. The silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that never quite arrives. By the time we returned to the parking area, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I thanked Ranger Williams for his assistance and promised to keep him informed about the investigation's progress. But as I drove back toward the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial about Jessica's disappearance. That evening, I spread all the evidence across my dining room table and tried to construct a timeline that made sense. Jessica had arrived at the preserve early in the morning with her research equipment and a specific plan. She had hiked to the remote location where she arranged her tools in a pattern that matched a symbol someone had recently carved at the abandoned chemical plant. She had collected soil samples, but not from her designated research site. Then she had simply vanished, leaving behind a scene that was too precise and deliberate to be the result of panic or accident. The more I studied the evidence, the more convinced I became that Jessica's research had intersected with something dangerous, something that connected to the mysterious history of the Hartwell chemical facility. But I still couldn't understand how she had known about the symbol, or why she had arranged her equipment to match it. I spent the next several hours researching everything I could find about Hartwell Chemical and the 1953 accident that had closed the facility. The public records were sparse and heavily redacted, but I managed to piece together a basic timeline of events. The company had been established in 1949 with government contracts to manufacture what were described as specialized chemical compounds for industrial applications. The facility had operated for only 4 years before the mysterious accident that resulted in its permanent closure. Most disturbing were the medical records from the local hospital, which documented unusual symptoms among the workers who had been exposed during the accident. Rather than typical chemical burns or respiratory problems, the victims had reported neurological symptoms including severe headaches, memory loss, and what the doctors had described as persistent auditory and visual hallucinations. Several of the affected workers had claimed to see geometric patterns and symbols that appeared in their peripheral vision, designs that they felt compelled to draw or recreate, despite having no artistic background or explanation for where the images came from. The medical reports noted that these symbols were remarkably consistent among different patients, suggesting they were experiencing similar hallucinations rather than random mental disturbances. I stared at the hospital records with growing unease. The symbols described in the 1953 medical reports bore striking similarities to the pattern carved into the concrete foundation and recreated by Jessica's equipment arrangement. It was as if the same geometric design had been influencing people across a span of 70 years. The following morning, I contacted Dr. Hammond, Jessica's thesis advisor, and arranged to meet with him at the university. I wanted to review her research notes and understand exactly what she had been investigating before her disappearance. If Jessica had somehow learned about the connection between her environmental study and the historical events at Hartwell Chemical, it might explain why she had been drawn to that particular location. Dr. Hammond's office was located in the Environmental Science Building, a modern structure filled with sophisticated laboratory equipment and research materials. He was a distinguished man in his 60s with the kind of scholarly demeanor that comes from decades of academic work. Detective Chen, thank you for coming. I've been worried sick about Jessica ever since I heard about her disappearance. She's one of our most promising graduate students, absolutely dedicated to her research. I explained what we had found at the preserve and asked to review Jessica's research materials. Dr. Hammond led me to a small office that Jessica had been using for her thesis work. The space was meticulously organized, with detailed charts and graphs covering the walls, and dozens of soil sample containers arranged on laboratory benches. Jessica's thesis focused on long-term environmental impacts of industrial contamination, Dr. Hammond explained as we examined her materials. She was particularly interested in how chemical compounds could persist in soil systems for decades and continue to affect plant and animal life long after the original contamination source was removed. As I studied Jessica's research notes, I began to understand the scope of her investigation. She hadn't just been studying the Hartwell chemical site as an isolated case. She had been documenting similar contamination patterns at abandoned industrial facilities across the region. Her work suggested that there were connections between these sites that went beyond simple environmental damage. Most intriguing were her recent entries, written in the weeks before her disappearance. Jessica had noted unusual mineral compositions in soil samples that didn't match any known industrial byproducts. She had also documented electromagnetic anomalies around certain contaminated areas, readings that suggested some kind of ongoing activity despite the fact that these facilities had been abandoned for decades. Dr. Hammond, did Jessica ever mention feeling that her research was being monitored, or that someone was taking an unusual interest in her work? His expression grew concerned. Actually, yes. About a month ago, she told me that she felt like someone had been following her when she went to collect samples at some of the more remote sites. She also mentioned that someone had broken into her car while she was working at one location, though nothing was stolen. This confirmed my growing suspicion that Jessica's research had attracted unwanted attention from people who had reasons to keep the truth about these contaminated sites hidden. But it still didn't explain how she had known about the symbol or why she had arranged her equipment to recreate it. I was studying Jessica's most recent research notes when I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden among pages of technical data and scientific observations was a hand-drawn sketch of the same geometric pattern I had seen carved into the concrete foundation at Hartwell Chemical. But according to the date on the page, Jessica had drawn this symbol 3 weeks before her disappearance, long before someone had carved it into the ruins. Dr. Hammond, look at this. Jessica drew this symbol weeks ago, but we just found it carved at the chemical plant yesterday. How could she have known what it looked like? He studied the drawing with obvious confusion. I have no idea. This isn't the kind of pattern that would appear in environmental research, and Jessica never mentioned seeing anything like this during her fieldwork. I photographed Jessica's sketch and compared it to the images I had taken at the preserve. The drawings were identical down to the smallest details, as if Jessica had been copying from the same source as whoever had carved the symbol into the concrete. But that was impossible unless she had somehow gained access to information that existed outside normal channels. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that challenged everything I thought I understood about this case. Jessica Martinez hadn't simply stumbled into danger during routine graduate research. She had been drawn into something that connected her work to historical events, mysterious symbols, and people who would go to great lengths to keep their secrets hidden. But the most disturbing realization was that Jessica might not have been a random victim. Based on her research focus, her knowledge of the symbol, and the precision with which she had arranged her equipment, it seemed increasingly likely that she had been specifically targeted because of what she had discovered about the Hartwell chemical facility and its connection to other contaminated sites across the region. As I left the university that afternoon, I knew that Jessica Martinez's disappearance was far more complex than a missing person case. I was investigating something that reached back decades into classified government projects, something that involved people with the resources and motivation to make inconvenient researchers disappear. What I didn't know yet was that my investigation had already attracted the same kind of attention that had led to Jessica's disappearance, and that I was about to discover just how far some people would go to protect secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. 3 years have passed since that October afternoon when I walked away from the Millfield Nature Preserve for the last time, and I still wake up some nights thinking about Jessica Martinez and the symbol that changed everything I believed about justice and truth. The official case file lists her as a missing person, status unknown, investigation ongoing. But I know the real story will never see the light of day. Within a week of submitting my preliminary report about the Hartwell chemical connection and the mysterious symbol, I was reassigned to a desk job reviewing cold cases. My evidence was classified, my access to the investigation revoked, and I was strongly encouraged to focus on other matters. The message was clear. Some questions are too dangerous to ask, some truths too inconvenient to pursue. I tried to continue the investigation on my own time, but every lead I followed ended in dead ends and deleted records. The abandoned chemical facility was cleaned up by a private contractor within months, every trace of the carved symbol removed. Jessica's research materials disappeared from the university, and Dr. Hammond suddenly decided to take early retirement. That's when I realized that 15 years of believing in a system that protects the innocent and punishes the guilty had been nothing but naive faith in an illusion. There are forces at work in this world that operate beyond the reach of law enforcement, beyond accountability, beyond justice as I had always understood it. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I turned in my badge, walked away from the career that had defined me, and tried to build a new life far from the shadows that had consumed Jessica Martinez and nearly consumed me. Some cases are meant to remain unsolved. Some truths are too dangerous to speak. And sometimes the only way to survive is to stop looking for answers. But Jessica's story deserves to be told, even if I can never prove what really happened to her. Somewhere out there, other researchers are asking the same questions she asked, following the same trails she followed, and I hope that by sharing what I learned, maybe one of them will be smart enough to walk away before they discover what Jessica discovered. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because there are more cases like this one, more stories that the system doesn't want you to hear. Drop a comment below if you've ever encountered something that made you question everything you thought you knew about the world around us. Remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can possess is the truth.